Hello! In one of my first videos, I explained how I got rid of my severe bloating, and one of the things that really helped me was following the Low FODMAP Elimination diet. One of my viewers requested that I made a video explaining exactly how to follow this diet, and that's exactly what I'm going to do today. I understand it can be super confusing to start this diet, especially because the research done on this topic is fairly recent, and while the number of resources available on this topic has been increasing, they can be a bit hard to find. Even when I was doing the diet, I had to do a lot of research on my own to be able to find the information that I needed in order to effectively follow the diet. So today I'll be breaking down everything you need to know. I will begin by explaining a little bit about the diet, then some things you need to do before starting, and then I will explain each of the 3 phases of the diet. I must say that everything I'm about to tell you in this video is based on scientific research, which I will reference as I go, but please bear in mind that I'm not a medical or science professional of any kind. I should also mention that any elimination diet should be carried out with the supervision of a professional doctor or nutritionist. This is because these elimination diets can be triggering for people who have suffered or are still suffering from eating disorders, and also because the restrictive nature of these diets can put you at risk of nutritional deficiencies. A doctor will also be the best person to advise you if this diet is the best recommended treatment for your specific case. If you have any concerns whatsoever at any point of the process, you should never hesitate to consult with a medical professional. Now back to the video. The Low FODMAP diet was developed by Monash University in Australia, and they are the entity leading FODMAP research in the scientific field for the past 10 years. Monash University defines FODMAPs as a group of sugars that are not completely digested or absorbed in our intestines. Now, if your gut is completely healthy and resistant, these sugars will do nothing to you. As a more common example, one of these sugars is lactose, and as you know, if you are not lactose intolerant, you can still ingest lactose and your body will process it normally. Also, FODMAPs are naturally occurring in most foods, and these sugars themselves are not the cause for gut conditions like SIBO or IBS. However, people with these conditions are more sensitive to these types of sugars and may suffer from digestive discomfort symptoms such as bloating, abdominal pain, or constipation. The level of sensitivity to these types of sugars also varies from person to person, and the main goals of the diet are not only to find which foods cause most sensitivity, but also what quantities. Before I started the diet for myself, I knew that I needed to do this in a very specific time frame. The diet can take some time to fully complete, so I knew that I needed to do it in a time when I was not going out to eat too much, that I wasn't traveling around, and that basically I could cook my own meals at home and take control over all the ingredients that were going into my meals. I'm not saying that the pandemic is a good thing, but for me, it was the perfect time to do this diet for myself because I was cooking all my own meals and having complete control over what was going into my meals. The Low FODMAP diet focuses on the foods that you can eat rather than focusing on the foods that you cannot eat. I'm going to be basing myself off of this list, which I will include the link to also in the description. It is a good list of all the foods you can eat, and it has also the quantities of the foods that you can eat. Foods on the list are considered low FODMAP up to the quantity threshold that is on the list. So you can eat all foods on the list up to the quantity limits that are stated on there. Before you start the diet, it's a good exercise actually to bring the list with you to the grocery store to start getting used to what foods are on there. The list really is quite long, so it doesn't really need to feel as restrictive. What will most likely happen is that due to the quantity restrictions, you're likely to have more and smaller meals throughout the day. The first phase of the diet is elimination. On this phase of the diet, you'll exclude all high FODMAP foods from your diet, and you will mostly stick to the foods that are on the list and to the quantity stated there. The elimination phase should take from 3 to 8 weeks, depending on how you respond. Usually, the elimination phase should end whenever you stop having discomfort symptoms. In my case, my discomfort symptoms have disappeared after 3 weeks, so after that period, I was fine to move on to the next phase. If after 8 weeks of following the elimination phase, the symptoms have not disappeared, the diet must be stopped because it's very likely that the symptoms are not triggered by FODMAPs, so there's no use in continuing the diet. Also, I'm going to say something very important. The Low FODMAP diet is not a permanent diet. Let me repeat that. The Low FODMAP diet is not a permanent diet. The Low FODMAP diet is a test diet to test which foods cause triggers and what quantities trigger those symptoms. FODMAPs are like the laxatives of nature, and they are prebiotics, which means that they feed the good bacteria in the gut. If you restrict FODMAPs for a long period of time, there will be a reduction in the good bacteria in the gut. Therefore, if after 8 weeks there is no improvement seen on symptoms, all the foods should be reintroduced back again into the diet. Apart from this, the Low FODMAP FODMAP diet is a diet that is naturally low in fiber, which may cause some constipation. To avoid this, you should be making sure that you're drinking plenty of liquids, eating plenty and a wide variety of all the safe vegetables and fruits that are on the list, and practicing daily exercise such as going for a walk, for example. If we look at the list and at the different types of sugars on the low FODMAP diet, there's a couple that I would like to bring your attention to. First, the low FODMAP diet is not a dairy-free diet, it's a low lactose diet. You are still fine to eat any dairy products listed up to the quantity thresholds stated there. And second, the low FODMAP diet is not a gluten-free diet. While gluten is found in wheat, wheat also contains fructans. And fructans are the sugars that the low FODMAP diet wants to restrict. Gluten is the protein in wheat, whereas fructans are the carbohydrates in wheat. Research suggests that people who claim to have non-celiac gluten sensitivity may actually be sensitive to the fructans in wheat rather than to the gluten. I know that gluten sensitivity is a very controversial topic and science evolves all the time, but for the moment this is what the research suggests. If you are struggling to understand which meals are safe to eat on the restrictive phase, I'm planning to make videos on low FODMAP meal ideas, which I will link here once they're available. It is also worth mentioning that if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, it is not impossible to complete the diet. However, it can be difficult. The reason for this is precisely because of the quantity limits that you can have on the diet. Most veggie protein sources are also rich in FODMAPs, which means that you can only have smaller quantities at each meal. So again, you'll likely need to have more smaller meals throughout the day. So important to note that the quantities listed are the threshold per meal, not per day. And this brings me to the topic of stacking. Stacking refers to the fact that FODMAPs can add up in your gut before they cause symptoms. This happens, for example, if you eat an acceptable amount of two foods too close to each other. So if you eat one banana now and one banana 1 hour from now, you're still sticking to the quantity limit stated on the list, but because 1 hour from now your first banana hasn't yet been digested, the second banana can add up to the first one and cause symptoms. Now, if you've started your diet and your symptoms have improved, there's no need to start worrying about stacking. However, if you've been on the diet for quite some time, perhaps over 3 weeks, and your symptoms haven't quite fully improved, it's probably good to make sure that you're leaving between 3 to 5 hours between each meal to avoid FODMAP stacking. If you slip up accidentally one day, please don't panic. Just take care of yourself and start fresh the next day. If you're afraid of stacking but you still need to snack in between meals, you can stick to foods that are FODMAP free, such as these. Phase 2 is the reintroduction or re-challenge phase. In this phase, you will reintroduce a high FODMAP food per FODMAP group one at a time to see what triggers symptoms. For this phase, high FODMAP foods are broken into 8 sugar types. There is lactose from dairy such as milk, cheese or yogurt. If you already know that you're lactose intolerant like I did, then you are fine to skip this one, as you already know that if you try it you will have trigger symptoms. Fructose, which is sugars in fruits such as apples, cherries and mango, but also in natural sweeteners such as honey, agave, and high fructose corn syrup. Then we split fructans into 3 categories. Fructans from vegetables, which is sugars in vegetables such as onion, leek and garlic. Fructans in fruits, that is sugar from fruits such as watermelon and nectarines. Fructans from grains, which is sugars in grains such as wheat, rye and barley. Gauze, which is sugars in legumes such as lentils, chickpeas and beans. And then 2 categories of sugar alcohols. Mannitol are sugar alcohols in vegetables such as cauliflower or squash. And finally sorbitol are sugar alcohols in fruits such as grapes, peaches and avocados. For this phase you can use a chart or a food diary such as the ones I'll put up on the screen and also in links in the description below. The foods that we'll use for the challenging phase are foods that have a more or less isolated amount of one specific sugar. This is so that if you have a trigger reaction to that one food, you know that you're having a specific reaction to that one sugar and not to a combination of different sugars. The way challenging works is per each type of sugar, we're going to have challenge day 1 where we have a small portion of the challenging foods. On challenge day 2, we have a medium portion, and on challenge day 3, we have a large portion. And then after these 3 challenge days, you have a period to 3 or 4 washout days. phase, where you go back to restricting any high FODMAP foods. If you complete days 1, 2, and 3 of the re-challenge, you're fine to proceed with the washout and continue. That means that you're not sensitive to these types of sugars. If you have severe symptoms on days 1 or 2, you must stop this challenge and proceed to washout. So go back to 3 or 4 days of restricting high FODMAP foods, and note that you're probably very sensitive to this type of sugars. This happened to me when I had my first portion of onion and my bloating just went through the roof with pain and cramps, everything. So I stopped and I proceeded to wash out, and I knew that fruit and vegetables were a trigger for me. If you only experience symptoms on day 3, so when you have a larger portion, you can either record your symptoms and proceed to wash out and to the next food group, or you may also want to proceed to wash out and then repeat that challenge, so that you make sure that your symptoms were exactly triggered by that type of sugar and not by some external factor. So something that I also had a lot of trouble trying to figure out was which foods should I use for the re-challenging phase. So to help you solve your problems, here's the list and quantities that you can use for days 1, 2, and 3 of the challenging phase. So then finally, phase 3 is the modified or adapted FODMAP diet. Once you've identified which foods trigger symptoms for you, you can then reintroduce all the other foods that are not part of that specific group, and then you can use this information to base your personalized diet to what you can and cannot eat. In my case, I already knew that I was lactose intolerant before I began the low FODMAP diet, so I continued to restrict lactose. During the diet, I also found out that I'm sensitive to fruit and vegetables, so onion, garlic, leek, etc., and so I began excluding those from my diet. You will then know which foods you can and cannot eat, and if you go somewhere to eat and you know that there's a risk of those foods being present in your food, you can also anticipate what comes next. Something that helps me a lot, especially in restaurants, is saying that you're allergic to the food. So don't say that you don't like it, don't say that it's bad for you, just say you're allergic to it. Especially if it's ingredients like garlic or onion, if you can't eat those, just say that you're allergic to them, because if you say you're allergic, they don't put it in your food. If you say you just don't like it, they put it anyways, and you'll never know. At least this is my experience. What you can do then at a later stage is re-challenge the whole group that triggers you. So for example, after you've continued with your personalized diet, you can then start to test individual foods in that food group to figure out which quantities or which foods even trigger symptoms for you. For example, if it's FODMAP vegetables, you already know you can't have onion, but maybe you can tolerate smaller amounts of garlic or smaller amounts of leek, or maybe mushrooms aren't even bad for you. So it's something you can test and figure out as you go. It's also important to note that our gut changes over time. The same way that people become lactose intolerant as they become adults, your gut may develop new food sensitivities throughout your life. In any case, I've left all the resources that I have and that are useful for you in the links in the description below, and I hope they help you get through this. If this video helped you, please make sure to leave a like below and subscribe. Again, any future low FODMAP meals, I will link them to the card at the end of this video, which you can watch. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and good luck. Bye!